Hey, what's up guys? It's Tips, and if you've watched my previous videos today, you will know that we had some big Classic WoW news this week. The Classic WoW beta has been announced to be released on Wednesday. The Classic WoW release date was announced to be released on August 27th. So we now know exactly when we're getting Classic WoW in its entirety, and in the meantime, we have the beta to look forward to and hopefully participate in ourselves. It's going to be very, very fun. However, I actually got to test the beta a couple of days ago, last week at Blizzard HQ in Irvine, California. Blizzard flew out a bunch of content creators and media outlets and journalists to test the Classic WoW beta, among other games, such as Warcraft 3 Reforged, and they even had some BFA stuff there, I think, too. We got to play for about 7 hours, from 11 a.m. Pacific time to 6 p.m. Pacific time, and the levels that we were given to us were a pre-made templated level 40 character, as well as the ability to start fresh characters at level 1. Before I get started in my impressions of the beta, I do want to tell you guys that the build that we played at this convention, at this media summit, is probably going to be a little bit different of a build than what's going to be available in the actual Classic WoW beta. We were informed that in the Classic WoW beta, the level cap might only be level 30, so this was actually taking it a little further beyond, a step beyond that level 30 cap. As far as we know, the build could be an older build than the one you guys will get publicly to test during the beta. So that's just a quick disclaimer, but I'm going to go ahead and go right into how I felt and my first impressions of that Classic WoW beta that we were given at the Media Summit. I'm going to start off first and foremost with the look and feel of the game. And right away, I will tell you guys, it stuck out to me like a sore thumb. The Classic WoW that we are getting is so smooth, so buttery smooth, so much smoother than an old 112 client on a private server. The FPS was obviously phenomenal. The way your character moved was like liquid. In old 112 clients, you'll often find your character stutter stepping, or there's just a little bit of a crank between movement direction and movement switching. None of that was there on the Classic WoW client. It was absolutely pristine. It literally felt like you were moving on water. And it wasn't just the movement of your character, but everything else. The way visuals and textures were loaded in was a lot smoother than we get in the 112 clients. You guys might have noticed when you're flying on flight paths on private servers, you'll see textures pop in and out, and it's usually very abrupt and very quick. It was so much smoother on the Classic WoW client. It was so much smoother and more immersive. I just can't stress how smooth the game felt. The shadows look a lot smoother. They're more updated. They're using the shadows, I believe, of the BFA client, but they've also downported lower settings shadows to be more akin to how they were back in vanilla. If you guys remember in vanilla on a 112 client, you'll see that if you have shadows turned down all the way or even turned on super high, the shadow under your character will always be a static circle. Whereas in the Classic WoW client, if you turn your shadows all the way up, you'll get an actual, silhouette shadow of your character. But if you turn it all the way down, you will get that circle as well. So they preserve that circle for authenticity. But yeah, I mean, the shadows look so much smoother. The coloring looks so much smoother. The lighting looks so much smoother. I remember back at BlizzCon during the demo, there were a lot of complaints about the shadows and the lighting and the shaders. And I was actually one of the people that complained about stuff like that, but it's just gotten so much better. So much better. And you can tell they were putting in the time and effort to make it look as much as it could look like vanilla, while at the same time giving people the options to dial things up a little bit higher to make the game look pretty fresh too. And I will say, it looks beautiful. It looks absolutely stunning. The settings that I played at personally were I would dial everything up except the water, which I would turn all the way down, and I would turn the foliage all the way down. The reason for that obviously is, the post-cataclysm water, I've always thought it looked a little bit metallic, like liquid metal. Never really looked very cool to me, so I always turned the water settings down to look more like the classic feel. And in terms of the foliage, this is something that I think still needs to have a little bit of work. It's not quite there yet. Simply put, there's just too much foliage everywhere, and where the foliage is kind of off. You'll just see a lot of plants and grass roots and stuff like that in areas that kind of seem a little bit off, even when you turn them all the way down. The second thing about the foliage was that when you walk through grass, the grass actually has physics. It moves, like it did, I believe, starting in Warlords of Draenor. Obviously, it wasn't the case back in vanilla. The grass textures were static, but in Classic WoW, they do move. They do have physics to them, and it definitely adds a little bit more life to the world. Just overall, contributing to that smooth feel and that smooth look of the game. Next up, I'm going to move on to the user interface. So going over the UI right now, as you guys can see on the screen in front of you, it's the new UI system. We've known this since the beta leaked screenshots. We've known this since the BlizzCon demo, if you want to go that far back. So the settings that you see here are obviously the updated graphical and display settings and interface settings. It would have been nice to see the parchment, but it's honestly not a big deal at all. Obviously, I'd rather have, better settings to control my game than, to have just the physical presentation of it. But it would have been a nice touch. And if Blizzard still wants to work on it, that's something I completely vouch for, because it is authentic and it was how vanilla was back in the day. There are a bunch of new settings. There are a bunch of new interface options that did not exist during Classic, the first of which is auto loot. Auto loot is kind of a convenience that I believe came into the game in TBC. Essentially, you no longer had to shift click a dead mob corpse to loot it. All you had to do is right click it. So with auto loot, you no longer have to press shift down to loot a corpse. You could consider it a change if you're like a diehard no changes person, but it's literally just not having to hold shift down. It doesn't really change the interaction of the game or anything like that, and I'm totally fine with it, personally. Moving on, the nameplates are different, and this was actually something I noticed during BlizzCon. The nameplates above enemy mobs' heads and your own allies' heads look to be smoother. They're not the original vanilla nameplates, and I think the plates were updated in Legion at some point. This looks like kind of the updated Legion legacy plates. So they're a little bit different. I mean, not really noticeable to like 95% of the population, but to me, it kind of stuck out a little bit. The coloring's a little bit different. But yeah, I just want to point out everything that I noticed, no matter how minor it is. Requesting stop on a flight path. Now, this is something that a lot of you guys might notice. Back in original vanilla World of Warcraft, if you took a flight path from City A to City B, and there were intermediate stops between City A and City B, there was no way of dismounting from the flight path unless you pressed escape and logged out of the game. It was like a small bug / workaround. Essentially, if you logged out during a flight path, mid-flight path, and logged back in, it would stop you, it would dismount you at the next appropriate Flight Master stop. That got changed later on in World of Warcraft. I'm not sure when they added this feature, but eventually in WoW they added a little dismount button while you were on a flight path that essentially did the same thing. Instead of having to log out, you just press the button, request stop at next flight point or something, and you would dismount at the next flight point on your way to your final destination. They are keeping that button, that little red arrow, they are keeping that in the game. And we asked them why that was the case. The response that they gave us was, well, back in vanilla, you could do the exact same thing. All you had to do was log out. Whereas, this is just a button convenient here for you. It's literally saving you one button click. The next UI change that I noticed that kind of stuck out like a sore thumb was the raid frames. If you guys remember back in vanilla, the raid frames were... They were something else, let me tell you. They were something else. If you've seen a screenshot of vanilla in a raiding environment, you know what I'm talking about. The raid frames were just disgusting. They were like individual nameplates that you would have to drag and drop and position on your screen. And they were just god-awful in every which way, to the point that everyone who raided would have a grid add-on or some kind of, raid frames, party frames add-on. So Blizzard decided, because of how janky those old raid frames were, they were going to keep the new modern Legion raid frames, or I think Warlords of Draenor raid frames that were introduced back in 2013. Those are still in the game, and like they are today, you are able to color them based on class. So you're not going to need to download a grid add-on. It's already built into the game right there. And the last thing that I noticed in the UI was no quest tracking on the map. Well, first of all, what is quest tracking? Well, if you open up your quest log and you shift click a quest, it'll come up on the right hand side of your screen and you'll be able to track the objective of that quest on your screen. But on top of that, it'll generate an arrow on your mini map showing you which direction you should go to complete that quest. Those arrows were not showing up in the classic WoW beta that we played last week. I'm not sure why. I'm pretty sure those arrows were there back in vanilla, so I'm not sure if it's like, a clash between the BFA system and the vanilla system they're trying to implement. But if it is a bug, I hope that it is addressed. But at the end of the day, we're probably going to have quest helper add-ons anyway, and I'll talk about add-ons and macros in just a little bit. Moving on to combat. This was the most interesting stuff in my opinion. So the first thing that I noticed right away as a warrior was that abilities worked a little bit differently on the classic WoW beta that we tested. First and foremost, charge. 10 times smoother, by the way, than it is on a patch 112 client. Feels so much better, so much more cohesive and just fluid. I loved it. Another interesting thing that I noticed when it comes to combat, and it's actually something that's different than on private servers, is how dodge and overpower functioned in the game. So right now on private servers, on most popular private servers, if you use sweeping strikes or whirlwind as a warrior on multiple targets, and one of your secondary or tertiary targets dodges that whirlwind or dodges that sweeping strikes, for whatever reason, you're unable to tap target to the dodge target and overpower them. The overpower proc just doesn't work. It only allows you to proc overpower on your primary target, and it's just pretty much always been that way on private servers as long as I can remember. In classic WoW, if a secondary or tertiary target dodges your attack in a whirlwind or a sweeping strikes, you are able to target to them and you are able to overpower them, which obviously makes a lot more sense. And clearly that was a bug on private servers. It must have operated the way it does on the classic WoW beta. If it doesn't, you can always report the bug, but I'm certain it operated that way back in vanilla, 100%, at least to my memory. And obviously we know, dude, the Mandela effect kicks in, man. Who knows? Who knows how it actually was? But it definitely works a lot better in the classic WoW beta. Something else that I noticed, the way Heroic Strike works, and I think this is a bug in the classic WoW beta. In old vanilla, back in the day, if you tried to Heroic Strike a mob while you're running away from it, essentially it will queue up the ability and, it'll wait a swing time until, you're either in front of the target or you're not in front of the target. And if you're not in front of the target, it would drop the spell. Whereas in Classic WoW, it would not even allow you to queue up a Heroic Strike if you were not in range of a target or if you were, looking at the target in a different direction. So it's a small thing, but Warriors will probably know what I'm talking about. And the reason why I'm bringing this up so specifically to Warriors is because every class had stuff like this. When Esfand was testing Paladins, he was finding out that Judgment was working differently. Something was going on with Judgment. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it wasn't working the same way as it did. No crit abilities proccing when you slash sit. So this is a big one for Warriors. A lot of times what Warriors will do on private servers is they'll intentionally taunt a mob in a raid and they'll slash sit macro, which will allow the mob to instantly crit them and will proc an enrage effect on the warrior, which gives them an extra 25% damage. It's a little cheese move that people do in raids. Puts a lot of stress on your healers, but it helps you pad those damage meters. That will not work in Classic WoW. We tested it with Enrage. We tested it with Blood Craze. We tested it with Reckoning for Paladins. You will not be able to slash sit, bait out a crit on you, and, proc an Enrage effect or something like that. Just simply does not work in Classic WoW. Mana regen rates were a lot lower. If you were casting spells as a mage or a warlock, even in the starting zones, it was noticeably lower. The mana regen rates were. They were so noticeably lower to the point where you literally had to drink basically after every single mob, even at low levels. And that will definitely slow down a lot of caster leveling speed. It will slow down mage AoE farming, which technically you got to drink after, pretty much every pull there. But for Warlock specifically, Stay Safe was playing. It was slowing down his leveling a lot, big time, to the point where I think he leveled from 1 to 10 around 25 to 30% slower on the classic beta than he normally does on his 112 client. So again, huge difference. And finally, when it comes to combat, spell batching. Spell batching is in the classic WoW beta, and it works pretty much just as you would expect. There is a small 0.2 to 0.4 second window after each ability for, another ability to cash in at the same time. It works, pretty much as you would expect. Although I did notice that in Classic WoW versus 112 clients, the spell batching is a little bit more forgiving, I guess you could say, where the window to land two abilities at once is actually a little bit bigger, which means that you will get more double sheeps, more double charges, more vanishing death coils, etc. in Classic than you do on 112 clients. At least that's how it felt like. And this is a very small, it's a very small detail, but it's something that I did notice. It did feel considerably slower on the Classic WoW beta. And that's pretty much it with combat. I mean, there were so many small things here and there. Moving on to systems. The old mount system was in the game. You had to train Kodo riding and wolf riding and, horse riding and all the different individual ridings, which implies that we will be able to purchase unarmed mounts at the start of Classic WoW, probably for Phase 1, which is really, really interesting. Number 2, right-click reporting is in the game. It still is in the game. I've made a video on this topic, and I think a lot of people have some misconceptions about that video. They didn't really understand what I meant in that video. I don't have a problem with right-click reporting at all. I think you should be able to report, malicious players in game. You could back in vanilla. I just have a problem with the automation system kicking in too early and punishing players that are otherwise innocent. I think you guys will be happy to know that it sounds like they are working on this. They are working on possibly raising the thresholds of reports required or removing the squelching feature entirely to make it so if you do get mass reported, it's not that detrimental to your gameplay. Obviously, unless you did something really wrong, in which case you get banned. But overall, they're fixing it so it's much less abusable, hopefully. Macros. The start attack macros in BFA work in the classic WoW beta. Start attack macros came into the game a long time ago. I think they came in TBC, although I could be wrong. But slash start attack macros, slash dismount macros, a lot of macros that are kind of modern, they work in the classic WoW beta. And if I were to take a little bit of a leap here, I believe that pretty much all of the modern macros, that system will work in classic WoW. And the old vanilla macros probably will not work. The old vanilla scripts will probably not work too. So just keep that in mind as well. Battle.net integration. Now this is an interesting one. So we always knew that Battle.net was coming to classic WoW. It was something that no changes individual fought because we knew it was an inevitability. This is how they do their customer service. This is, the entire Blizzard ecosystem. There's no way you're moving BNet from classic WoW, period. That being said, I do believe there are ways to kind of limit its obstruction or limit its impact on classic WoW. And I think Blizzard has implemented some of these changes. The first one, you will not be able to right-click add a friend of the opposing faction. It's something you can do currently in retail WoW today. You will not be able to do that in classic WoW. So, in the circumstance where you're on a PvP server and you come across, a human in Stranglethorn Vale and you're an orc, you won't be able to right-click, add that human, and talk to them and tell them, hey, man, don't kill me, I'm questing. And they're like, oh, yeah, I got you, man, don't worry about it. None of that nonsense. You will be completely alien to the opposing faction. If you have already added someone to your Battle.net friends list, you will be able to see their location in-game regardless of faction, and you will be able to communicate with them regardless of faction. For example, you guys know Stay Safe and S-Fan are going Alliance in Classic, I'm going Horde. Both of them are on my BNet's friends list, so when I open it up and they're in-game and I'm in-game, I can see exactly which area they're in, which zone they're in, what level they are, so on and so forth, and they can see the same for me, and we can actually whisper each other back and forth in-game too. So if you are playing with some friends and you're trying to stay out of, stay out of trouble, stay out of the ganks, you're going to have to toggle the appear offline function in your Battle.net settings so you can kind of hide yourself away so no one can know exactly where you are. So just keep that one in mind. Moving on to some private server changes. There were a few noticeable changes that I saw in the Classic WoW beta that just, work differently in Classic than they did on private servers. The first one is the mob abilities. The mob abilities in Classic are so different, dude. So many more mobs have so many more abilities. And one of the mobs that I tested right away was the Fire Rocks in Tanaris. This is a really popular grind spot in Tanaris. It's by the Abyssal Sands. Basically, there's probably like, 15 to 20 mobs there. If you're a Frost Mage, you can round them all up and AoE them down really easily. If you're a warrior, even, the Fire Rocks have such low armor and HP that it's worth, grinding there for a couple of levels. I went there and I found out that in Classic, lo and behold, those mobs have a Fireball ability. And they do not have that ability on private servers. So it makes things a lot more difficult to AoE farm. In fact, you simply cannot AoE farm those mobs anymore as a mage, period. Because they'll just sit there and cast fireballs at you, and you can't really round them up. So that entire location has to be thrown out of every single mage's AoE farming book. And this is just one example. Pretty much every single mob out in the world, especially beyond level 30, has an extra ability or two, or possibly different abilities, or they cast their abilities at different frequencies, or the mob AI in general is just so much better in the Classic beta that the mobs are a lot more dangerous because they position themselves better. I mean, just the mobs, dude, just the mob AI is so different. And you'll play it, you'll see it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. It feels like a different world when you're outside fighting things. The next thing that I noticed is outside to inside summoning. And I'm not sure if this is a bug in Classic WoW or if it's wrong on private servers. I'm tempted to say it's a bug in Classic, because I looked at some of the patch notes when it comes to ritual summoning, and it doesn't seem like the summoning ritual was ever changed to include this. But as it stood in Classic WoW, you could summon someone inside an instance if they were outside the instance. And again, that doesn't work in patch 112 clients. That, may have worked back in vanilla, but we're not sure. And this does make things a lot easier. Obviously, summoning people, to raids and dungeons and stuff like that. You can summon them when they're outside the instance to inside the instance, meaning a lot of people straight up won't have to leave an instance, or they won't have to travel to an instance because someone in their group can just summon them inside. So that was a noticeable change. I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there was anything else. I mean, I'm sure there was. There were so many small things here and there that were just a little bit different. Dude, the armor and damage values of mobs are so different in Classic, and this was immediately noticeable. Some mobs have so much more armor in the Classic beta than they do on 112 clients. And the second I got home after we tested this stuff, I came back and I checked my own 112 client, and believe me, things are different. I would say that leveling overall in Classic WoW is going to be much harder, or at least, might take 30%-ish longer, in my estimation, than it does on 112 clients. It just feels like so many more mobs have so much more armor here and there, and yeah, it was all over the place. And speaking about armor and damage values, we got confirmation that boss armor in Classic WoW and boss armor in Vanilla WoW was not standardized. And the example we were given was Gar has a lot more armor than like a spellcasting boss, for example, like Baron Geddon. That was the example that we were given. And not only are armor values different, but resistance values are different as well. And the example that Ian Hazakostas actually gave us was there are some bosses in Vanilla that might just have 200 shadow resistance on them for the lulz. And that's it. They just have it for flavor. Whereas other mobs might have 0 resistance, to shadow, and 0 resistance to other schools. And basically every single boss, as we were told, was given, customized resistance values and customized armor values, depending on what kind of boss they were. That's just what we were straight up told. We didn't get to raid during the demo or the beta or anything like that, but that's something that we were told, and that is a big revelation that's going to impact a lot of the raid composition meta on private servers and obviously in Classic WoW too. So we'll see what it ends up being. We won't know because it's all server side, but at least we can see the impact in the game. That's pretty much it as far as private server changes go. There might have been a couple things here and there, but nothing that I wrote down specifically. Moving on to finally the bugs that we encountered. So obviously the beta build that's going to go out is a beta, meaning that the game is not complete, meaning that, we should be testing it and reporting any inconsistencies that we find, so on and so forth. There obviously were quite a few bugs in the Classic WoW beta, and a few that I noticed right off the bat. The first bug was map bugs. When you take a boat or take a Zeppelin, your destination is not clocked in correctly on the map, so that needs to be fixed, obviously. The second bug that I noticed was if you're running, and if you've, keybound your food key, and if you're running, and you just press your food key, it will consume a charge of your food without, prompting you to stop or whatever. It's not how it happened back in Vanilla. I'm pretty sure it's not how it works on 112 clients. You need to stop before you can eat. Whereas in Classic WoW, you could just keep running. You could be accidentally spamming, your fine cheddar cheese or your Darnassian blue, and it could just consume all the charges and you wouldn't even realize it. It's definitely buggy. It's not perfect. But that being said, it's very close. It's very polished and refined. It doesn't feel like any other Blizzard beta that I played. I played the BFA beta, and I will tell you the BFA beta felt very janky. There were a lot of disconnects. A lot of things just weren't working properly. No, it doesn't feel that way. It feels like most things are working. We didn't get any unnecessary disconnects. Nothing crazy happened. And I would expect that the Classic WoW beta is going to be one of the smoothest betas that Blizzard has ever had, period. Just because, the content is basically done, and essentially all you're doing is testing around small things in the game. Guys, we had so much fun. We had so much fun playing the Classic WoW beta. We ended up running a dungeon. I ran a Scarlet Monastery Cathedral with Towley and Chinglish. We did some Gurubashi Arena, where I killed S-Fan a couple of times, as you guys can see in this footage. He told me not to put this in the video, but I think you guys can obviously tell that I kind of sniped the last shot, you know what I mean? We had a blast, and everybody in the auditorium was having a blast. I mean, not just, the classic WoW people like me, S-Fan, Stay Safe, Quissy, whatever. I mean, all of the newspaper and magazine journalists that were there, the IGNers, the Euro gamers, the PC gamers, the game spotters, all of those guys were having a blast. And we were cheering, we were laughing, we were yelling. I hope that that same spirit and that same enthusiasm and that same childlike joy continues moving throughout the entirety of the beta, which I'm sure it will. But that's pretty much it for me in this video, guys. If you guys want to see me play the beta live on stream, I am most likely live right now. You can check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv/tipsoutbaby. I'll be streaming this beta every single day, all day. It's going to be absolutely insane. Going full neckbeard. And I hope you guys enjoy watching and enjoy seeing me test things and enjoy participating in some of the community events that I have planned for the beta. So keep an eye out for those as well. Have a wonderful day, fellas. I'll see you guys over on Twitch. And as always, tips out, baby.